He made history as his law school's first black valedictorian. But it was at the dinner table, surrounded by wealth and subtle scorn, where his real speech was delivered. They didn't expect him to steal the room. Not the trustees sitting in the front row with stiff ties and fake smiles. Not the donors who barely glanced up from their programs. Not the professors who praised his work in private but rarely made eye contact in the halls. And certainly not the Wainwrights, sitting halfway back, polite smiles, arms crossed, already mentally at dinner. But Elijah Grant didn't come to meet expectations. He stood on the stage at Stanford Law School, tassel brushing his cheek, hands gripping the sides of the podium. His eyes scanned the crowd, not with nerves, but with focus. He spotted his mom first, 2 rows from the back, cheeks wet, hands clasped like she was still in Sunday church. Then he began. No notes, no hesitation. 3 years ago, I walked into this building and couldn't find a single face that looked like mine in the faculty wing. The room quieted. 2 years ago, I brought forward a case where black tenants were being pushed out of their homes illegally. I was told by a professor to pick battles that might actually matter in court. Silence. Heavier now. And last year, I applied for a clerkship with a federal judge who said I was impressive, but probably too assertive to fit in his chambers. Pause. I still got the position. Laughter broke the tension, sharp and knowing. Elijah smiled just a little. His voice was smooth, deliberate. Not angry, not dramatic, just certain. He spoke about the law not as a tool of control, but as a mirror of values. He talked about fairness, not as a lofty ideal, but as something that had to be fought for in rooms like the one he was standing in. He reminded them that the rules weren't neutral, and neither were the people who enforced them. He made them remember. When he ended, I didn't come here to belong. I came here to build something that will outlast all of us. The room rose, not all at once, but in waves. Some slow, some reluctant. But eventually, everyone stood. Even the trustees, even the Wainwrights. Elijah didn't look for their approval. He walked off the stage like he'd walked onto it. Quiet power in every step. Outside the auditorium, students were already pulling him in for hugs, faculty offering handshakes. His mom grabbed his face and just stared, like she wanted to memorize him. "You did that, Eli," she whispered. "You really did that." He smiled, but only for her. "We did." Off to the side, a hand slipped into his. Soft fingers, a quick squeeze. Emily Wainwright. Her dress was flawless, like everything she wore. Her smile was a little too rehearsed. "You were brilliant," she said. "You sure?" he asked, more playful than bitter. "Your dad didn't stand until the last second." She rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. He's just awkward in public." Elijah didn't answer. He'd already learned that awkward was often code for condescending. But he wasn't trying to argue. Not tonight. "Anyway," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Dad wants us to come to dinner. Just the family. They made a reservation at Blue Fox Tavern." "Kind of a tradition." Elijah hesitated. "Is it a good idea?" he asked Elijah. "That's rare. Just come. One dinner." He exhaled slowly. Nodded. "All right." But inside, something tugged at him. Not fear, not quite suspicion. Just something quiet, tugging at the edge of the celebration. But he pushed that thought down, unaware that the real speech hadn't happened yet. And the real test was still ahead. Elijah had never been to Greenwich before. He'd passed through once during a law clinic internship, but he didn't stop. It wasn't the kind of place you stopped unless you had a reason, and tonight, he had one. Emily's family home sat on a hill, boxed in by trimmed hedges and floodlights that made the lawn look like a golf course after dark. The driveway curved in a perfect semicircle. A valet stood waiting, wearing white gloves. "This isn't dinner," Elijah said as he stepped out of the car. "This is a summit." Emily laughed lightly. "Stop," but she knew what he meant. She hadn't warned him about the valet or the fact that they'd be eating in a private dining room instead of the family kitchen. Maybe she didn't think it mattered. Or maybe she didn't want to admit what it meant. Inside, the house was colder than the air outside. Not in temperature, but in tone. Clean marble floors, Oversized furniture, tall glass vases that looked like they'd never been touched, art with names instead of meaning. Elijah had grown up in New Haven. Not poor, but not this. He knew dinner to be noise, warmth, smells. Here, it was glass and silver and silence. Her mother greeted him at the door. "Elijah," she said, like trying out a word in a new language. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Mrs. Wainwright," he said. Her hand didn't extend, just a smile. Thin. "Come in," she added. "We're all waiting." The dining room had already been set. White napkins folded sharp, candles flickering against crystal. Her father sat at the head, flipping through a wine list. "Grant," he said without looking up. "The man of the hour." Elijah nodded once. "Mr. Wainwright." He took the seat next to Emily, directly across from a woman in pearls, who looked him over as if he were a curiosity. She smiled. Not warm, not cruel, just curious. "I'm Aunt Beverly," she said, "Emily's mother's sister. I hear you're quite the speaker." Elijah returned the smile. "Thinner. I try." "Impressive," she continued. "I suppose your school's really invested in elevating different voices these days." Emily tensed beside him. Elijah heard the words behind the words, but didn't blink. "It's a competitive process," he said simply. "Nobody hands you that mic." Beverly smiled again, this time like she'd scored a point. "Of course. I meant no offense." Her father cleared his throat. "So, law school. Big deal. But I gotta ask, what made you choose it? That field's not exactly easy. Lots of reading, arguing, all that stress. Don't you guys burn out fast?" Elijah adjusted his posture. "I don't mind stress. I grew up around people who had to argue for their lives daily. Law just gave that instinct structure." The silence that followed was just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Her father chuckled once. "You've got answers ready." "I've been tested before," Elijah said, then added, "Dinner smells great, by the way." Emily's mother smiled, proud of the food, not the conversation. Salads arrived, then a wine Elijah couldn't pronounce. He didn't drink much anyway, especially when he needed his mind sharp. Tonight was one of those nights. He watched the table, not just the faces, but the little movements. A side glance here, a fork dropped and picked up too quickly. Small things. But they said a lot. Emily touched his hand under the table. He didn't look at her, but he felt it, a signal. "Hang on, just hang on." "I read your article," Beverly piped up again, between bites of sea bass. "The one about racial bias in housing law. You're passionate." Elijah's jaw moved once before he responded. "It's personal." "Sure. But do you ever worry that kind of framing undermines the neutrality of the legal system? It's just, some people think the law should be above emotion." He smiled without smiling. "Some people don't have to rely on emotion because the system already works for them." Her fork paused midair. The table hushed slightly. "Didn't mean to cause offense," she said again. "You didn't," he replied. "Just clarity." But that wasn't the moment things shifted. Not yet. That would come when the room pushed too far, and Elijah stopped pulling back. It started with a clink. Mr. Wainwright set down his wine glass, leaned forward, and looked directly at Elijah like he was assessing a purchase, not a person. "So tell me, Elijah," he began. "When you were applying, did you check one of those boxes? You know, the ones for diverse candidates?" Emily froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Elijah didn't flinch. "I filled out the same application as everyone else, sir." "Of course," Mr. Wainwright replied, lifting his hands. "Not saying you didn't earn it. But let's be honest. These days, schools are bending over backwards to make the numbers look a certain way. Not that it's your fault." Beverly let out a soft chuckle. "It's true. There's a lot of pressure to diversify. My friend's son got rejected from Yale Law. Perfect GPA, internship with a judge, fluent in Mandarin. Got beat out by someone with less traditional credentials." Elijah tilted his head. "Interesting how you know more about the person who got in than the one who didn't." "Excuse me?" she asked. Sounds like you're assuming your friend's son deserved the spot more, just because his resume looks like yours. Emily placed her napkin down gently. Dad, Bev, can we just enjoy dinner? Her mother was silent, still slicing into her fish like nothing had happened. Mr. Wainwright leaned back in his chair. Relax, Em. It's a conversation. Thought we were celebrating. I'm just trying to get to know the man you're so serious about. Elijah wiped his hands with the cloth napkin slowly. I think the question is whether you're trying to know me or trying to corner me. I'm being honest, Mr. Wainwright said. Can't fault me for wanting to understand where you're coming from. I appreciate honesty, Elijah said. I just prefer it without the condescension. Her uncle, a broad-shouldered man who hadn't said much yet, jumped in. Whoa, let's not make this bigger than it is. We're all just talking here. No, Elijah said, voice calm. You're not talking. You're testing. There's a difference. Beverly raised an eyebrow. Sensitive, aren't you? Sensitivity and awareness aren't the same thing, Elijah replied. And awareness has kept people like me alive in rooms like this. That line hit differently. Nobody responded right away. Even the waitstaff sensed something. They cleared plates a little faster, heads low, eyes careful. Emily leaned over slightly. I didn't know they'd come at you like this, she whispered. I know, he whispered back, but I did. The table shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Elijah wasn't reacting. He was analyzing. And they didn't know what to do with someone who didn't fold under pressure or match them with anger. So, her father said again, trying a lighter tone, tell me, Elijah, what's the plan after graduation? Where do you want to end up? Elijah looked at him for a long second. D.C. clerkship, then civil rights litigation, probably public advocacy, but eventually federal bench. Beverly blinked. Federal judge? Ambitious. It has to be, he said. If I aim lower, someone will move the target again. Her mother spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. That's a cynical way to view the world. It's a realistic one, Elijah answered. Emily tapped her nail against her glass. A nervous habit. Maybe we should all try to stay off hot topics? Elijah smiled slightly. More for her than anyone else. It's not the topics that are hot. It's the temperature in the room when you're the one being asked to justify your place at the table. Silence again, but this one lasted longer. No one laughed. No one deflected. Even the air felt different. But Elijah wasn't done yet. The table didn't know it, but the conversation was about to take a sharper turn. And no one at that table would come out of it the same. The main course arrived with awkward speed. Grilled duck with a blackberry reduction, placed gently before guests who suddenly didn't seem all that hungry. The servers refilled glasses. Beverly pretended to be fascinated by her napkin ring. Mr. Wainwright stared at the centerpiece, swirling his wine. It was as if they were hoping to bury the last 10 minutes beneath expensive food. But Elijah wasn't going to make it that easy. He cut into his duck like he had all the time in the world. So, he said, voice even, what made you all so curious about quotas tonight? I've been with Emily for almost 2 years. This is the first time you've really said more than 5 words to me. Beverly laughed nervously. It's not that. I mean, we've been proud of Emily dating someone so accomplished. You're clearly very well-spoken. Elijah raised his eyebrow just slightly. Well-spoken. Her words landed harder than she expected. The room braced. Mr. Wainwright interjected. Come on now, don't twist things. No one's attacking you. We're just talking like adults. I agree, Elijah replied. So let's talk plainly, because I've noticed something. He placed his fork down, calm, in control. The curiosity tonight, it isn't about law school. It's not about my speech. It's about the fact that I don't look like what you thought Emily would bring home. And everything since the salad course has been a carefully disguised interrogation. Emily's face turned toward him. She hadn't heard him speak like this before, measured, unwavering, and cutting without raising his voice. Beverly leaned forward. Now hold on. No, Elijah said. Not loudly, but firm. Let me finish. The table went quiet again. I've had to explain my presence in so many rooms that I know the patterns by heart, the forced politeness, the backhanded compliments, the micro-corrections that come from people who want to feel open-minded but can't quite let go of their assumptions. Her uncle scoffed. You think you've got us all figured out after one meal? No, Elijah answered. After a lifetime of similar ones. Mr. Wainwright's mouth twitched, trying to hold composure. Look, maybe we said a few things awkwardly, but don't turn this into some kind of accusation. You're young. Sometimes young people get a little carried away. Elijah didn't blink. I'm 24. I've passed the bar. I've clerked for 2 judges. I've been invited to speak at legal conferences with sitting members of Congress in the room. I don't say things I haven't thought through. Her mother finally looked up from her plate. You're clearly very intelligent. But there's also something to be said about grace. I agree, Elijah said without pause. Which is why I've shown plenty of it so far. That one stopped her. Emily exhaled, shaky. I didn't want this to happen. I thought maybe they'd see you the way I do. Elijah looked at her. For a moment, his expression softened. You didn't think they'd say anything, and that's the difference. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth stung more than she expected. From the other end of the table, Beverly tried once more. You're very composed, Elijah. But I wonder, if you're always this defensive, how do you plan to work in high-stakes law? He turned to her slowly. I've worked in courtrooms where my clients were assumed guilty just for walking in. I've argued against lawyers who called my approach aggressive just because I didn't back down. And I've written legal opinions that made older men twice my age rewrite their arguments. Pause. If you think this dinner is high stakes, you haven't seen anything. The room absorbed that line in full. A long silence followed. Even the duck didn't look appetizing anymore, but the silence wouldn't last much longer. The conversation was shifting from subtle discomfort to something raw, and soon, someone would cross a line that couldn't be walked back. It was the silence that did it, not the comments, not the smug glances or deflections. It was the silence, thick, drawn out, and full of something they couldn't name, that made Elijah decide he wouldn't leave that table with anything unsaid. He picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, then he looked at Mr. Wainwright. Let me tell you about a case, he began, voice low but clear. A woman in Bridgeport, single mother, working 2 jobs, comes home one day to find an eviction notice taped to her door. No one moved. She never missed a payment, but the building had changed hands. New owner wanted to clear out the units, raise the rent, upgrade the neighborhood. She was one of 6 families pushed out in under 3 months. No legal justification, just pressure and paperwork. He let the words sit a beat before continuing. She came to our legal aid clinic. I spent every spare hour pulling bank records, lease agreements, city code. We proved that the landlord fabricated violations to void leases. Beverly fidgeted in her chair. Her uncle looked down at his plate. We won, Elijah said. The court called it a calculated abuse of legal tools. That case helped trigger a citywide audit. But here's what stuck with me. The look on her face when she realized someone finally believed her. He paused, placed his glass down. That's why I do what I do. That's why I don't stay neutral. Because neutrality in the face of power is just quiet approval. Emily glanced around the table, waiting for someone to respond. Mr. Wainwright cleared his throat, trying to shift the tone. It's a good story. You clearly care. I respect that. I just think sometimes people like you get too personal. The law should stay clean. Objective. Elijah gave a short laugh. Not mocking, just tired. There's no such thing as clean law. There are just people pretending their version of the world is the only one worth writing down. That got her mother's attention. So, are you saying everyone at this table is, what, biased? He looked at her directly. I'm saying everyone at this table came in with assumptions. And I walked in knowing I'd have to prove more in one meal than most people do in a lifetime of dinners. Emily opened her mouth. Maybe we should... No, Elijah said gently. It's okay. Let me keep going. He turned to Beverly. You asked how I plan to survive high-stakes law if I'm always on guard? Easy. I've been on guard since I was old enough to be followed around a store. Since teachers marked me disruptive for asking too many questions. Since classmates asked if I got into college because I could run fast. Beverly's eyes narrowed. You're painting everyone with a pretty broad brush, don't you think? Elijah didn't blink. I'm holding a mirror. Whether you like the reflection is up to you. That line landed hard. You could almost hear the weight shift. The waiter arrived with dessert. Something with cream and shaved chocolate. But no one picked up a spoon. Even the sweetness looked out of place now. Elijah leaned back, calm as ever. I didn't want this dinner to be about me defending myself. I was hoping to meet you all, share a moment with the woman I love and the people who shaped her. But when every sentence is a test, you stop feeling like a guest and start feeling like a case study. Emily reached for his hand again, this time not under the table, right in front of them. I'm sorry, she whispered. He squeezed her fingers. It's not your apology to make. Her uncle stood abruptly. You've said your piece. Maybe it's time to wrap this up. Elijah stood too. Not to storm out, just to meet him at eye level. I wasn't asking permission. But what happened next didn't come from Elijah at all. It came from someone else at the table, someone no one expected to speak. All eyes turned toward the far end of the table. Sitting beside Aunt Beverly, a man who had barely spoken all night cleared his throat. Late 20s, clean-shaven, pressed shirt, Rolex loose around his wrist. His name was Trevor, Emily's cousin, hedge fund analyst in Stamford. A man who usually played it safe. But now, Trevor spoke. You know, he said slowly, I used to think stuff like this didn't matter. Thought people overreacted, got too emotional. I figured if someone's smart, they'll rise. Doesn't matter where they come from. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like glass on tile. Then I started working under a guy who never let me lead meetings, even though I hit every number. He'd joke that I was too soft. One day, a new hire showed up. White guy, average performance, louder than me. Took over meetings in his second week. The boss said he had leadership presence. Everyone stared at him. I realized then that I didn't start from the same line. Trevor continued. Some of us have to prove we belong twice. Once with our resume, then again when we walk in the door. Beverly turned. Trevor, this isn't... No, he interrupted. This is exactly what it is. He looked at Elijah. I heard your speech. And yeah, I stood late. Not because I didn't respect it. I just needed a second to process that it came from someone who looked like me. Elijah gave a subtle nod, the kind that said, I see you. Mr. Wainwright looked like he was trying to recalculate the whole conversation in his head. Beverly leaned back in her chair, stunned into silence. Even Emily's mother, who hadn't spoken for several minutes, seemed unsure where she stood anymore. Trevor wasn't finished. I don't know what I expected tonight, but I didn't expect to feel ashamed. Not of you, he said to Elijah, but of how used to this I've become, of how many rooms I've stayed quiet in. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. For the first time that evening, no one was posturing. Mr. Wainwright tried to reclaim some control. Look, I'm not saying there's no bias out there. I'm just saying not every situation has to turn into a lecture. It's only a lecture when someone thinks they're being taught something they don't want to hear. Elijah replied, or when they already knew it. Trevor added quietly, but chose not to listen until it made them uncomfortable. Emily's mother pushed her plate away. Her voice was soft. We didn't mean to make you feel like you had to defend yourself tonight. I know, Elijah said. That's part of the problem. He didn't say it cruelly. There was no triumph in his tone, just tired truth. Beverly folded her napkin, lips tight. I'll be honest, Elijah. You made me feel cornered, like I couldn't say anything without it being interpreted as an insult. I know that feeling well, he said. I've just learned to live with it. No one had a reply for that. The dessert remained untouched. Coffee went cold. Even the perfect lighting couldn't soften the air in the room now. Elijah stood again, this time with finality. I appreciate the dinner, I really do. But respect isn't just about being invited. It's about being treated like I belong without having to prove it first. Emily rose too, slipping her arm through his. Trevor gave him a small nod, then looked at the others. Maybe next time. We'll ask more questions to understand, not just to test. But the real moment of clarity wouldn't happen at the table. It would come later, between Elijah and Emily, when the night's words could no longer be left hanging between them. The car ride was quiet, not tense, just quiet in a way that made every streetlight feel louder than it should. Elijah drove with one hand resting on the wheel, the other loose in his lap. Emily sat beside him, staring out the window as if the darkened sidewalks held answers she couldn't find in her own reflection. "I didn't think they'd go there," she said finally. Elijah didn't look at her. "I did. I know. You said as much." Her voice cracked, but I guess I hoped it wouldn't happen, that maybe, just once, they'd act like decent people. He turned onto Elm Street, passing a quiet row of storefronts. They didn't yell, they didn't curse, they didn't call me anything ugly, but they made me feel like a stranger in a room I was invited into. Emily leaned her head against the window. I should have stopped them sooner. He glanced at her. "Why didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her words came slowly. "Because I didn't want to believe it. Because it's easier to pretend people you love don't carry those ideas. And because I was afraid that if I stood up to them, they'd look at me the way they looked at you." That admission hit hard. Not just for her, but for him too. He pulled over into a small parking lot, the kind tucked behind closed shops and flickering neon signs. They sat in the car with the engine humming low. "You love them," Elijah said. "I do," she whispered. "But tonight made me realize I don't know if they really know me, not all of me, not the version that loves you." Elijah finally turned toward her. "This isn't about choosing between people. It's about what you tolerate in the people you love." Emily's eyes glistened. "I didn't see them clearly until tonight. I've always known they were elitist, snobbish even, but I thought they were harmless. They weren't harmless tonight. I know." She turned in her seat to face him. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you just walk out when it started?" Elijah exhaled through his nose. "Because I've walked out of too many rooms already. I wanted to see what would happen if I stayed and told the truth." Emily nodded slowly. And I think maybe, for the first time, they listened. Even if they hated every second of it. He reached out, gently brushing her knuckles with his thumb. "What about you?" "I heard everything," she said, "and I hated how familiar some of it sounded in my own head. Things I've heard before and let slide. Things I've thought were harmless because they weren't aimed at me." She paused. "I don't want to be that person anymore." The car felt still, in a way that wasn't heavy, just honest. Elijah said, "There's still a lot to unpack, for both of us." "I know," she said, "but I'd rather start now than pretend it didn't happen." He gave a small smile. "That's the real reason I stayed, you know?" "What is?" "To see if you were going to pretend." She reached over and took his hand fully now, fingers wrapping tight. "I'm not." But even as they sat in that car, processing the wreckage of a night meant to celebrate, they didn't yet realize that the impact of that conversation would echo far beyond the dinner, and not everyone would walk away unchanged. The next morning, Elijah's phone buzzed twice before he decided to look. One new voicemail, unknown number. He didn't answer unknowns, but something told him this one wasn't spam. He hit play. "Hi, Elijah. This is Trevor. I, just wanted to say thank you. For yesterday, you said things I've swallowed for years, and it messed me up. In a good way. I've already had 2 conversations this morning that felt different, felt honest. I'm not sure what happens next, but yeah, I needed that." He ended the message with a quiet breath, like even leaving it had taken effort. Elijah put the phone down. He didn't smile, but something in his chest felt lighter. Later that afternoon, Emily texted, "Call when you're free. Mom wants to talk." He waited a few minutes before calling, not out of reluctance, but to prepare himself. When her mother answered, she didn't waste time. "Elijah," she said, voice surprisingly level. "I owe you an apology." He said nothing, letting her continue. "I didn't speak up last night. Not when I should have. And I let my silence send a message I didn't mean to send." Still, Elijah said nothing. I'm not calling to defend myself, just to say, I heard you, and I'm sorry, he spoke at last. What did you hear? She hesitated, but not for long. That you didn't feel like a guest, that you felt on trial, and that's not how anyone should feel at our table. He nodded slowly. I appreciate you saying that. I don't know how to fix all of it, she admitted, but I want to start by owning my part. That's a start, he said, and meant it. They didn't talk long, and there was no grand closure, but it wasn't nothing. Later, Emily showed up at his apartment with takeout in one hand and a printed email in the other. This, she said, handing him the paper, is from Beverly. Elijah raised an eyebrow. She couldn't say it out loud, but she wrote it down. Small steps, right? He unfolded the email. It was short, not sentimental, but honest. Elijah, last night challenged me in a way I didn't expect. You were right. I didn't listen. I reacted. I'm going to do better. Not for approval, but because it's overdue. Beverly. He read it twice. Did you read it? He asked Emily. She nodded. She sent it to me too. Said she needed to sit with her discomfort before she could own it. That's something, he said. They ate on the couch, their bodies close but not tangled. No performance. Just rest. Do you regret going? Emily asked quietly between bites. No, Elijah said. I regret that it went exactly how I thought it might. But I don't regret staying. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Me neither. He put down his plate and let his hand find hers again. You know, he said after a beat, I used to think changing minds meant shouting louder, writing longer, out-arguing everyone. And now? Now I think it's about holding your ground long enough for the room to shift. Even just a little. She looked up at him. You didn't just shift it, you redefined it. But for Elijah, it was never about conquering the room. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to walk in ready for battle. 2 days later, Elijah drove back to New Haven. The sky was the color of concrete, but the air was warm. He liked drives like this. Quiet roads, music low, thoughts moving freely. Not the kind that tangled him up, but the kind that sorted things out slowly. He thought about that dinner. He replayed the moments. The tension. The precision it took to respond without exploding. The way Beverly's voice tightened. The shift in Trevor's posture. Emily's hand under the table. All of it. It hadn't been a victory, not in the traditional sense, but it hadn't been a loss either. It had been necessary. At a red light, he checked his phone. A new message from Trevor. Heard back from the board about that diversity initiative I proposed. It's happening. Thanks for the push, even if you didn't mean to give it. Elijah smiled. Then, another notification. A message from someone he didn't recognize. Hi, Elijah. I'm a friend of Trevor's. He sent me your graduation speech. Just wanted to say thank you for putting into words what so many of us have felt. I've shared it with my team. We needed it. He placed the phone back down, the screen still glowing faintly beside him. He didn't set out to be a symbol. He hated that idea. He was just a man who knew what it felt like to walk into rooms where he wasn't expected to stay long. But this time, he hadn't just stayed. He'd shifted the air. He thought about his mom, what she would have said about all this. She'd probably remind him not to get too proud, but her eyes would have said everything else. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily. Thinking about you. I know this weekend didn't fix everything, but it broke something that needed breaking. He read the message twice. It was the kind of sentence that lingered in the chest, not just the mind. He pulled into the driveway of his apartment, engine ticking as it cooled. The neighborhood was quieter than Greenwich. No valets, no fountains, just neighbors and streetlights and the distant sound of a basketball hitting pavement somewhere nearby. Elijah sat in the car a moment longer. He thought about every dinner he'd been quiet through. Every moment he swallowed his thoughts. Every time someone told him he was impressive, like it was a surprise. This time, he'd said something. This time, someone listened. That mattered. It wouldn't change every room, but it would change some, and that was enough for now. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, and walked inside. As he unlocked the door, he thought of one last thing. Brilliance isn't about speaking loudly. It's about being so clear, so grounded, so undeniable, that the room has no choice but to adjust. And maybe the next time someone like him walks in, they won't be treated like a visitor. They'll be treated like they belong, because they always did. If this story moved you or made you think differently, share it. Talk about it. Let it live beyond this screen. And if you're someone who's ever been made to feel like you had to prove your right to be in the room, know this. Your presence is not a gift to the room, it's a test for the room. Subscribe to the channel for more human stories that challenge, reflect, and remind us what really matters.